Please start your presentation.
Okay, great. Is it working? Great. So thank you very much to OSGeo Japan and Philosopher G for inviting me to give this keynote. So I'm Brandon. I live nearby in Taiwan. And today I'm going to talk about a project I created a couple of years ago called Protomaps. Part of that is a format called PMTiles. The topic of my talk is why this project is successful, or like my theory for why this project has been adopted around the world. Very quick intro to the project for those who aren't familiar with it. So Protomaps is a tool to create open source maps and visualize geospatial data, especially on the web. Parts of the project are the open PMTiles format, as well as an ecosystem of tools to create and serve PMTiles files. And the Protomaps project also includes a distribution of base map data based on OpenStreetMap. So the screenshot on the right is an open source viewer for the current state of the base map data. It is an open alternative to using something like Google Maps or Esri Maps that a company or an organization like JICA is able to host themselves, even on their own cloud storage or on something like a Raspberry Pi. And a little bit more about the PMTiles format. So PMTiles is a public domain specification for a cloud native format for tiles, for map tiles. And that means a tile set that you can zoom in and you can zoom out and you can pan. So it's optimized for making interactive maps on the web or on mobile. And in essence, you are able to store a very small or even very large tile set as only a static file on cloud storage. Cloud storage means a service like Amazon S3 or Cloudflare R2 or Microsoft Azure. Those cloud storage services are a commodity. You can find services to store objects in the US, in Japan, in Asia, or elsewhere. And the last part is that for the PMTiles implementation, it is based on HTTP range requests. That is similar to cloud optimized geotiffs. And internally, PMTiles uses a space filling curve, the Hilbert curve, to organize its data. That helps a lot with compression. So the screenshot on the right is from the open source viewer again, which shows a little bit of how those tiles are organized internally. So the key topic again is, why is Protomaps a successful project? And a motivation for this is many people, they ask me about their own open source project. They ask for advice on how to make it succeed on many aspects, because if you go on GitHub today, there are probably thousands or even maybe hundreds of thousands of different projects. And some of them are maintained, some of them aren't, some of them succeed and thrive, some of them don't. So really, why is it? Like, what reasons are there for projects to thrive or to not thrive? So one question people have is it important for an open source project to make money? And I think that is an important distinction between a business and an open source project. A business is usually successful if it makes money. So you can make, you can go down the street and open a noodle shop, and maybe the noodles are very tasty, but if you lose money on each type, like on each bowl of noodle, then it's probably not a success. Like you're losing money as a business. So I would say in general, it's not important for an open source project to make money. There are ways that you are able to make a job out of open source, such as consulting. But in its current state, Protomaps is an open source project. There is no licensing fee. There is no subscription. And in fact, it is a replacement for many commercial services. If you subscribe to Google Maps, for example, then you might have to pay a usage fee for each request you make to the API. So a very important aspect of Protomaps as a project is that it is often a way to save money. And for me, it being able to monetize as a business is not an important part of the success of the project. So another question is a project successful if it has many features and many maintainers? Um, and if you look at some of the most successful projects in open source geospatial, you will see they have many format support and many features and hundreds of contributors. For example, probably the most successful open source project in geospatial is GDAL. It has almost 2 million lines of code, and it has over 500 contributors on GitHub. While for the PMTiles project, this one component, all of the implementations of PMTiles that are referenced, like Python, TypeScript, and C++, are only about 8,000 lines of code. And the number of contributors is less than 40 through like the 6 or 7 years that this project has existed. So there is a huge difference in scale between an older project like GDAL that is used everywhere and a relatively new project like PMTiles. It is actually very small of a project and does not have many contributors. But I would also say that for PMTiles and Protomaps as a project, it is a focused project. It is quite small. There are only a few maintainers and contributors. There is not a lot of code, and that to me is also important in making it successful, is keeping it quite small, since otherwise it requires more and more resources to maintain. So really, for me, I think the key part of the success of the project is how widely adopted it is. And it is used by thousands of projects and developers now around the world. Those can be very small hobby projects or large organizations or nonprofits or commercial companies. But for me, the biggest surprise in developing this project over time has been how widely it's been adopted. And one point of data you can find is how often the PMTiles, the most popular implementation in JavaScript, is on NPM. And as of July of this year, it is being downloaded more than 100,000 times each week. So you can see the curve, the growth. Even just this year, it has almost doubled the number of developers that are using this, or that are keeping that project as a dependency of their projects in JavaScript. So this is just the data for JavaScript. There might also be a lot of adoption in Python and C++, but that's more difficult to track. And some examples of organizations that are using the PMTiles project. One of the most largest organizations is the New York Times. Now many of their visualizations of weather and earthquakes are using PMTiles served from a CDN. And another example of a larger organization that is using PMTiles is Protomaps. And their viewer for their data, it visualizes over 100 gigs of data using only an S3 bucket. So the standard viewer at explore.overturmaps.org is powered using PMTiles, and they create a new release of this large tile set each month. So just going back to this key topic of why is this project a success? The question I want to focus this talk on is, why do developers choose to use the project? Because again, there are many open source projects on GitHub. There are hundreds or thousands, many of them that do similar things or are also for serving tiles or doing a visualization of geospatial data. So why do people choose this project? And one idea that I have, and I also discuss and hear a lot about, is the idea of using PMTiles or Protomaps because it is higher performance or it is more optimized. And I think that is true in some sense, but the way I see it is that the format itself is just efficient enough. It is not the main focus of the project. Because in fact, so PMTiles as a serverless technology, as a cloud native format, is often slower or less performance than a tile server. If you use a tile server, you may only have maybe 10 milliseconds of latency, while cloud storage like Amazon S3, especially if it is in a different region, may have 60 milliseconds or more, or even like 200 milliseconds of latency. And in fact, the format itself has some overhead, where if you want to serve a PMTiles file from cloud storage, you need to make at least one extra HTTP range request in order to retrieve the header or some directories. So an illustration of how that works is for a tile server, you simply send a request for a tile to a server and you get back a tile. While for PMTiles, you need to make at least one extra request in order to read parts of the file. So it is inherently less efficient, in fact, than using a tile server. So I think this idea of performance or optimization being the only reason why this format is successful is not totally true. There are other reasons why this project has been adopted around the world. So going back to the key topic of why do developers choose to use this project? I'm going to go over some key themes that I think are very applicable to other projects as well, or even your own projects. And I would say the primary focus for Protomaps as a project is to create a simple developer experience. So there are some examples. So please raise your hand if you recognize what this is. Okay, so maybe about half of developers in this room. So the Ruby language is a Japanese open source project, and it came from Mats in the 90s. And in fact, for the Ruby language compared to some of the alternatives like PHP or Python or Perl, was significantly slower as a language. However, it was widely adopted, especially in web development, because of the Ruby on Rails framework and the more sort of easy developer experience for making web applications with Ruby on Rails. So this language was really optimized for developer happiness and not only efficiency. And the Ruby design itself and features of the language, they encouraged a culture of testing, which also made developers happier, since they were able to create more automation around making sure the projects were stable over time. And another example of developer happiness is React. So React as a framework was often slower or created more code than doing manual DOM manipulation. However, the simpler abstraction and data flow for React led it to become the dominant web framework for making front-end code. So that's another example of a project that took a different approach, a different abstraction that might have been less efficient than before, but was able to make developers happy. So PMTiles is a simple abstraction for large geospatial data that does not require a server. And then although its approach of doing multiple requests for tiles can be slower, it has a simpler developer experience of only needing to upload a single file to S3 or other cloud storage. Some other aspects of the developer experience that are part of the Protomaps project are that the command line interface is easy to install. It is a Go program that is a single binary. The JavaScript libraries do not require a bundler, and integrating with MapLibre, which is a popular renderer for maps, is only 3 lines of code. And the popular Tippecanoe tool can output PMTiles directly. So an example of how to add PMTile support to your Map Libre project is only 3 lines of code, just an import statement, as well as specifying this protocol. So it is very, very simple. It is optimized for the simplest possible developer experience. So the developer experience is the first reason. And the second reason I want to talk about is brand communication. So an example of branding in new products is this. Are there any people here that recognize this logo? Okay, a couple. So this is kind of a funny story because it's a product called Heroku. And Heroku came out almost 20 years ago. And one funny story, since I was talking with my friend who was from Japan and asked him, this word Heroku, what does it mean in Japanese? And he said, it's nothing, it sounds like Japanese, but it means absolutely nothing. And I'm like, wow, that's great. Because you have created a unique term, a unique concept for your project's qualities. And now developers, they associate this term Heroku with being simple web development and deployment. And there is another example is Haagen-Dazs. So if you see the word Haagen-Dazs, you might think, oh, that's a European language, but in fact, it means nothing. It is no language. But you associate that word Haagen-Dazs with good ice cream. And one very important place this matters is when you search for things, such as documentation. So if you search for PMTiles on GitHub, you will find thousands of examples of people using that code successfully. And if you had a very common project name like Zen or something, then it might be very hard to find some results for how people use the project. So searching on GitHub is very important. And these project names, such as Protomaps and PMTiles, were chosen to be unique and easy to search for, because I think that part of the developer experience is being able to find documentation, whether that is on Google, whether that is on LLMs like ChatGPT or Claude. It's important to be able to have developers create an association between your project's name and the concepts that it embodies, those positive qualities that it embodies. So those two were my first reasons: simple developer experience, brand communication. The third one is the idea of bottom-up adoption. And what do I mean by bottom-up? Well, if you look at a lot of how technologies become adopted in organizations, it is top-down. There is maybe a manager or a CTO who hears about something new, gets a sales pitch from a company. For example, they say something like, well, we are paying for an Esri subscription already. We are paying for ArcGIS. And that includes, this web maps like ArcGIS Online. So it doesn't matter what your preference is. You must use this technology from the top down because we are paying for it. And oftentimes developers, they don't think that it's the right solution. Maybe it's too complicated. Maybe it's not a good match for the project. But they have to use the project because you're already paying for it. And I think this happens a lot. It's a large challenge for FOSS4G because of this sort of top-down adoption of technology. So a very important part of why PMTiles is a successful project is the idea of bottom-up adoption. So bottom-up adoption is developers, they can use free software. They can find something on GitHub or they hear about through a blog or a talk. And they say, well, so we might already have, this thing like ArcGIS, but in fact, we're able to use PMTiles on our existing cloud storage and publish these interactive maps with lots of data. So this is something that does not require managers or CTOs to buy into a new service, a new subscription, or a new license. They're able to start using the project completely from open source because the developers are happy using it. And it does not require approval because they're able to use technology that they're already familiar with, such as cloud storage. So this is a very specific target audience, which is that if you are a organization that runs many servers already, then maybe adding a geo server or a tile server or an Esri service is no big deal. So you ask, why is cloud storage important? But I think for many people that are the target audience for the Protomaps project, it is much easier. It is much easier to adopt in your organization because of bottom-up, because a developer can choose the technology. They do not need the approval for a new license or a new subscription. But if you are already on a commercial project or you are used to managing tile servers, then maybe those solutions are better for you. So the last reason why I think developers use Protomaps is because there is a lot of outside innovation going on. And what outside means is that, so going back to the goal of this project being quite small, only a couple thousand lines of code for the PMTiles format, for example, is that many other developers need to be able to create things on top of it independently. So as features are added to the project, it becomes more difficult to maintain. But of course, people want new data sets, new languages, new software. So it's very important that those developers can create things independently, since otherwise you get into a situation like this comic that you might have seen on the right, where one project or one developer has to hold up the entire world. And that is not really sustainable because it becomes harder and harder to maintain over time. So one example of outside innovation is at OSMF Japan, which hosts a mirror of planet data from OpenStreetMap on their own servers. That is totally independent of the data that I maintain. And it is also hosted in Japan, so it is lower latency for users in Japan. It's updated weekly, and that is a static file that they host that you can download. So that's an example of an organization that is doing innovation outside of the Protomaps project. And another example is the PMTiles RS project. This is a Rust implementation of the PMTiles format. Again, it is totally independent of the Protomaps project itself. Since the PMTiles format is public domain, they have written a high-performance Rust implementation that is used by the Martin tile server. You can find a link to that implementation on GitHub here. So finally, there is a new project called Matterhorn, which is similar to Protomaps, but it is for delivering this digital elevation model, or DEM data, in PMTiles format. So this collects these elevation models from governments around the world and combines them into one mosaic for a global elevation model. And it is designed to work with MapLibre for doing interactive web visualization. So you can find out more about this project at matterhorn.com. So finally, I want to just sum this up again with some lessons for how your open source project can succeed. So the first one is that focusing on performance and efficiency is very important, but it is not enough to have it is not enough to make your project a success. In my opinion, it is more important to optimize for only developer happiness. A second lesson from the Protomaps project is to build a brand, because otherwise people are not going to know what even to search for or what to find or what to look out for that is your project's very unique qualities. Like for example, I have the example of Heroku as a project brand that people associate with simple web deployment. Third, it's important, especially in FOSS4G, that your project can be adopted bottom up. So it should not require a CTO to do some kind of sales pitch in order to buy your project. It needs to be something that developers can start using immediately and solve a problem. And finally, your project design needs to encourage other developers to create their own things. And those projects need to be able to be run independently, like the OSMF Japan example I showed you, or Matterhorn. It's important to have building blocks that other developers can reuse, because not all of the innovation not all of the innovation has to come from inside the project itself. It's more sustainable if there are many things going on in the ecosystem. And that is the end of my presentation. I am happy to take questions and talk to people at the conference. But that is all, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Brian-san, your wonderful presentation. And let me ask a question from participants. はい、皆さん質問があればぜひお願いします。英語が話せる方は英語で、もし話せない方は通訳をついてきたので、弊社の通訳が通訳します。ぜひ質問ある方、挙手で。ライドンさん、台湾からわざわざ私もジャパンのためにいらしてくださったので、ぜひ、この機会に。
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I'm Anderson from the Arcade Space. So we are using a PMTiles, so it is a very good technology. So I have a question. So I understand your 4-point to successful open source project, but I think any OSS project have some experience to trigger the project will have been more popular. For example, some big company adopts that your technology, or I can say some big jump in the technological feature. So I want to know in the case of the PMTile, what is a big trigger, a big event this project is more popular in the OSS, in the host4g community?
What is the events that made it more popular? I think one very important part was the integration with a tool called Tippecanoe to create PMTiles. That development on making Tippecanoe output PMTiles was sponsored by a company called Felt. And I think making it as simple as possible, because many developers already use Tippecanoe. So once we add that new feature, then it is only one step to create PMTiles. But I would say I don't think there is some big jump in the adoption in the projects, because the project has already been released for several years, about 5 years, and it has been growing quite slowly, consistently. But now, like I showed you in the chart, maybe this year it is many more. But I think it is also because many developers in Japan and around the world are writing like blog posts or documentation or discussing it. So I think those are important channels for people to find out about the project. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
ありがとうございます。他に質問がある方はぜひ。
Thanks for your great presentation. Do you have any regrets on the design of PMTiles? I mean, so PMTiles became so popular, too popular to change anything at this point. So if you create it from scratch, do you change something or?
No? The question was, do I have any regrets about the current design? My answer is currently not yet. Okay. So I'm quite happy with the design. There are trade-offs. For example, it could have better compression. One of the limitations of the design is that web browser only supports gzip decompression. And it is a limitation that if web browsers add support for Brotli or Z-standard, then it will become more efficient. I think overall, there is not a plan for a PMTiles v4 right now, because it would be very difficult to change the format. I think it is something like, for example, like JPEG or PNG or JSON. They have to create a very simple format, and then it lasts a long time. So right now, there is no plan to change the format. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Good to know.
Yes.
ありがとうございます。もしあと一人ぐらい質問を受け付けたいと思いますが、ぜひこの機にいかがでしょうか。
Yeah, thanks for the inspiring talk. So I want to ask a bit about making a global or bigger impact through the open source. So I think we have a lot of potential for the Japanese developers to create like world level open source projects like PMTiles, but one problem may be the language barrier. So we have more local projects, for example, the documentation are written in Japanese and so on. So I guess you are based in Taiwan now, right? But you're making this big project. So any suggestions or comment for the Japanese developers making bigger open source impact?
Yeah, so I think it's unfortunate about the localization that many of the open source projects is dominated by English. And, but I find that most developers, because of documentation and stuff, have very good English. I'm always impressed by how good people's English is. I would say offering documentation in other languages for the Protomaps project right now is not there yet. I think it would be great if there was more documentation in Japanese. But I think one part, like I said, is that it's very important when you choose like the project name, for example, that it's easy to search for, because it's important that people can, you know, like do things like pronounce it, and also just be able to remember how to spell it, for example, because if they speak a language other than English, then maybe it's very hard for them to remember what that project name is, for example. So I would say my suggestion is that developers think more about this kind of branding or communication in addition to thinking about the code and the documentation, because I think in the open source community, many people sort of undervalue that. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
は、そろそろ時間になりましたので、ブラインドさんの発表は以上にしたいと思います。まだ会場にいらっしゃるので、ぜひ質問してくだ
Thank you very
さい。
much.